Hello and welcome to this amazing interview with John Perkins, the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John, how are you?
I'm great, Sam. Thank you. And you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for
Great.
taking your time in your busy schedule to talk about peacemaking. And John, if you don't mind me asking you a very blunt question, why don't we have peace in the world today? And is there something we could do through lobbying, pro-peace lobbying, to achieve it?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, but in a way, it's simple. Human nature seems to be somewhat aggressive at times, and yet with the same idea in mind, uh, I think that it's particularly become a problem in the last several millennia, last 2 or 3 thousand years. I spent a lot of time standing with indigenous people in the Amazon. I just came back from there about 3 weeks ago, and I head out there again in a couple of months. And these are people who are known as great warriors. But the reason that they fight historically is that they have a mythology that's based on a god that tells them that if they don't keep their populations down through birth control and other methods, they are cannibalizing the forest. So the mythology revolves around these cannibals that attack them, a myth of cannibals. And the only way they're going to be able to defeat the cannibals is to recognize that they too are cannibals. They're cannibalizing the forest. And so this mythology says, if you can keep your populations down through birth control methods, which they do have, natural ones, great. If you can't, then you're cannibalizing the forest and you have to weed your own gardens. So they depend a lot on a plant called manioc or yucca, which is quite common in Latin America and other countries. And the story goes, the women who garden yucca have to weed some of the plants in order for the other plants to thrive. And if you don't keep your populations down, then you're going to have to weed your gardens by going to war. And when I first came across that legend many years ago, it explained to me a lot of things. Like I'd grown up with a very deep fascination for the American Indians. And I've always wondered how there were stories about how sometimes they counted coup. They just went into another village and tapped the other guy on the shoulder or someplace with a spear and said, okay, I won that one. Counting coup. Kind of like, martial arts or sword fighting today, where you just touch the person. And and other times they go in and kill people. And I always wonder what made the difference. And when I heard this myth in the Amazon, I thought, well, I think that's the answer. That the difference is that when populations get too big for hunters and gatherers to live off of, and hunters and gatherers need a lot of land. When population pressures get too much, they go to war to weed their gardens. But in modern times, excuse me, we go to war for very different reasons. We go to war to dominate other people. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a drink of water here. We go to war to control resources and to dominate people. And we've seen this over and over, but I don't think that's really part of human nature. It's become part of our philosophy, part of our way of life in a way as humans, something that it's a perception that we've bought into. And Sam, when perceptions mold reality. So if you have a perception that your neighbors are your friends, unless your population gets to be too big, in which case you both have to make some sacrifices, that creates a certain reality. If your perception is that, well, we have the right to control all the resources we want as a country, and if anybody gets in our way, we'll kill. That's it. That creates a whole different reality.
So, John, in your opinion, do you think we can make a difference by hiring experienced lobbyists in DC to counteract the effects of the pro-war lobbyists that are actually causing these conflicts in the Middle East and, working for the weapons manufacturers, this major conflict in Ukraine, and 47,000 killed in Palestine is just unimaginable. You know, if there's a death that we sometimes we grieve over the death of one person sometimes, and that's too much. We cannot even picture, you know, 47,000 dead in Palestine in that small enclave called the Gaza Strip. Can we make a difference, John, in your opinion, if we were to organize an army of volunteers, peacemakers, and simply hire professional lobbyists in DC to pursue this pro-peace agenda to counteract the warmongers?
Well, sure. You know, I think back to the Vietnam War, and I was very active as an anti-war protester and refused to be drafted. So that's one of the reasons I joined the Peace Corps. In fact, it's the main reason I joined the Peace Corps. And it worked ultimately. I think governments realized that they just weren't going to be able to keep sending our young people off, that we just weren't going to put up with it any longer. Plus, we weren't winning the war, and that made a huge difference. Is anybody winning the war in Gaza? I don't think so. Nobody's winning. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy. And I think to a large degree it's driven by one man's selfishness, frankly, Netanyahu, who doesn't want to go to prison, and I believe he's a psychopath and a narcissist, and that's so often been the case. And we can say the same thing is true, I think, of other world leaders, including Putin. And we certainly saw it with Hitler, and on and on and on. Leadership is a big, big problem. Human beings who covet power and are ruthless and will go to any ends to get themselves in power. But demonstrating against those people, putting up a good front against them, continuing to let our government know we don't want to be involved in this anymore. We want to make sure that this thing ends. It has to be an approach that we take. I would add, however, that all of this that we're talking about, Sam, is short term. And short term can be my lifetime. But if we're really looking at the long term, the only way we humans are going to become peaceful, I think, overall, is to change our perception of what it means to be humans, being human on this planet. That we have to move from what I call a death economy to a life economy. Because the death economy is really what's behind most of the wars that we have today. Unlike those of the far past that I mentioned, or that indigenous people fight in order to maintain their territories as hunters and gatherers. Today, the wars are about controlling resources and controlling other peoples and populations, creating empires, expanding. Very greedy, selfish human motivations that are almost always driven by a single person or a collective of people that agree on the need to expand their territory.
And John, in your book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you talk about your first assignment being in Indonesia, then in Ecuador. Do you think that today we have sort of similar consultants being involved in this war in Ukraine, in Kiev, Ukraine, and in Yerevan, Armenia, and Baku, Azerbaijan? Is it, in your opinion, is it possible that all these, in Palestine, all these conflicts are kind of being stirred around by people that you once kind of fulfilled that role as an economic consultant? Is it possible, or these are unrelated wars that are not stirred up by any sort of independent consultant from DC?
Well, today we have a lot more economic hitmen than we did in my day. Every major corporation has its equivalent. That wasn't true in my day. We were sort of generic. We worked for the World Bank or the U.S. Treasury. But today, every major oil company, every major pharmaceutical company, every major international company has their equivalent. And certainly these people are looking at what they consider to be the best way for their company to maximize short-term profits. This whole system is driven by this this idea that corporations need to maximize short-term profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. So certainly oil company people are involved in these wars to some degree. How do you control these resources? Water resources today play a large role. Increasingly around the world, we're seeing a lot of minerals, the ones particularly that are used in high tech, cobalt, copper, gold, lithium, and others that are causing tremendous strife and wars. We don't hear very much about the wars that are going on constantly in Africa. We hear about Ukraine and we hear about Gaza, but these terrible situations in many parts of Africa and now Latin America, a country that I know very well, Ecuador, has always been an incredibly peaceful country surrounded by two countries that were fairly violent, Colombia and Peru, involved in drug trafficking. Well, now Ecuador has gotten deeply involved in this too. And to a large degree, that revolves around the mining. In addition to drugs, it revolves around the mining of gold and cobalt and copper. So yes, and all these companies, in answer to your question, we've got people behind the scenes that are doing things that promote these wars. Whether their goal is war or not, I can't say, but their goal is to control resources, and if that involves war, so be it, in their opinion.
So, John, today we hear in the news all the time these so-called development banks, not retail banks, but special kind of governmental, quasi-governmental banks from London, from DC. They provide upwards of $500 million in loans to Kiev, to Yerevan in Armenia, supposedly to build roads, to build the infrastructure. But is it the same kind of a hook that they're being put on just the same way? Like in your book, you describe how Ecuador and Indonesia was hooked on these loans. Is it identical what's happening right now in Kiev, Ukraine? They just don't know it?
Well, yes, that's probably part of it. But of course, in the case of Ukraine, and you've got this man Putin who's driven by, I believe, he's driven by this desire to kind of recreate the Soviet Union. I think this expansionist thing is driving him to a large degree too, and I'm sure some of that's about resources, some of that's about control of some of the waterways, but some of it's just plain, I think, this nationalistic desire to expand their territory. And if you hear some strange noises in the background, I have a cat who's dying to get onto this program, so she's making.
We could bring him along if you'd like. We all love animals here. We love animals here.
Come here, Jaggy. Her name's Jaggy. She's named for my book, Touching the Jaguar, because she acts like a jaguar. But so I think and again, in the case of Gaza and Israel, I think an awful lot of what's going on there is driven by human ego, human frailty, if you want to call it. Stop it. Here, hold on. I gotta get it. All right. Here's this young jaguar. Here's this young jaguar.
She's cute. Very cute.
Yeah, she's sweet, but she demanded to come in, and now she's demanding to go out. Cats. That's a cat. Anyhow,
speaking of the jaguars, you in your latest book, talking about the jaguar, you mentioned sort of the spiritual aspect of your evolution, how you've realized what you were doing wasn't really sitting well with your internal kind of a compass or your philosophy, and you stepped out of that consulting role. And can you just briefly tell our audience, what was that transformational process like for you when you realized what you were doing was wrong and you decided to no longer be that hitman, economic consultant, and then you became an author and you decided to expose the global scam, this global economic enslavement, the slavery system that we have today?
Yeah, so I was an economic hitman, or chief economist was my official title, for 10 years. And for about 7 of those years, I believed in what I was doing. And I think that's part of the problem, Sam, is that we've got people in these businesses that really believe that what they're doing is the right thing. So in business school, I was taught, and later by the World Bank and through econometric models, that if you convince a country to take huge loans from the World Bank or what we call the Washington Consensus, any of these investment institutions, and pay our companies a lot of money. Our companies make huge profits to build big infrastructure projects in these countries. The economy increases, and you can show through statistics that it does. And so, for many of those years that I did that, I thought I was helping these countries. But now, over time, and particularly with the help of Omar Torrijos, who was the head of state of Panama, I came to understand that GDP, gross domestic product, really measures the wealth of few individuals as well as our own corporations. It does not indicate prosperity for all the people. So, in taking up these big loans, these countries would have to collateralize their oil or their copper or gold, mineral, whatever the resource was, and then they would have to pay off the debt. And in paying off the interest on the debt, they would divert money from healthcare, education, and other social services. So the majority of the people would actually suffer in this process because of the debt. And in the long run, they couldn't pay off the principal. So then we go back in, usually under the guise of the International Monetary Fund, and say, hey, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource real cheap to our corporations without environmental and social regulations. Vote with us on the next United Nations vote against Cuba or whatever. Let us build a military base on your soil. In other words, you become part of our empire. You become subservient to us because of the debt. And but I didn't get that. For the first 7 years I was doing this work, I thought I was doing the right thing. So once I understood what I was doing, then it became difficult to get out. Nobody wanted me to get out. Plus, I was making very good salary. I came from a relatively poor teacher's family in rural New Hampshire, and suddenly I'm flying first class around the world, staying in the best hotels, eating in the finest restaurants. I didn't want to admit that what I was doing was what I was doing. So finally, I had a spiritual enlightenment, if you will, as you mentioned, and realized I had to get out. But I think that story is a very telling one because there's a lot of people in that business who believe they're doing the right thing because that's what we're taught to believe. That's the perception. Again, perception molds reality. And the perception we have is that developing these big infrastructure projects in these countries helps everyone in the country, when in fact it helps the rich who use the electricity, who own the factories, who own the industries, who own the businesses that benefit most from the roads and the airports and all the other infrastructure that we invest this money in, but leave the rest of the people in debt.
You know, John, I call daily by telephone and I try to find or identify lobbyists in DC or in that area, the Beltway Loop, you know, who might be willing to be hired to kind of come work for us to counter the uh, to counter the actions of the other lobbyists who represent weapons manufacturers. And you know, I can't help but notice that as soon as they ask me this question, whom do you represent and what will be the task? I said, we're pro-peace organization. They do not take us seriously, even though they will be paid. They will be paid the same money that they would be paid by weapons manufacturers. But they hesitate because perhaps they view the weapons manufacturer's position as more prestigious or more stable, or that there's more money involved, that there's can you help me understand and our audience, you know, why would a lobbyist that represents weapons manufacturers, that promotes the sort of the death economy, would not be willing to seriously look at switching sides and represent another organization who will pay them perhaps the same money, but just to represent peace goodness and just tranquility in the world. What is the hang up for them to not to take us seriously when we say we're pro-peace organization? What's the problem here?
Well, I suspect it's different for different individuals, but in general, I would guess that they don't believe you'll be successful, whereas they do believe that the big industries that they can represent are going to be around for a long, long time and be successful, and they'll keep working for them and making money off them. I just returned few weeks ago from Ecuador, which I mentioned earlier, which is going through this crisis, and I was meeting with the Shuar people, a large indigenous tribe, but then recognized today as its own nation that lives in the Amazon region that's being attacked by these mining companies and oil companies. And it was interesting to me that the president of the Shuar organization, who I met with, was lamenting the fact that now a number of Shuar men and women have gone to law school and they've become professionals or they've become doctors. And he said, but not one of them will represent our cause to save the environment. They go to work for the oil companies. They go to work for the government. It's that same thing. And I said, well, why do you think they do that? Is it just about money? He said, well, I think it is about money to some degree. But he said, I also think it's that the education they're getting is convincing them that that's the right thing. The justice system works, and the government needs to keep exploiting oil and other minerals in order to build more infrastructure, in order to help its people. They've essentially bought into the same perception or misconception that I bought into. So once you get into that system, you're ingrained in it, and it's very difficult to get out. And the other thing is, once you're in it and you start making money, and you yourself go into debt to buy a bigger house, a yacht, or cars, or get married and want to send your kids to college, you're stuck in this system. It's a very, very insidious path toward ultimately, I think, I hate to say it, but ultimately, if we keep on this path, we're headed toward the destruction of our species, at least as we know life on this planet, as we know it.
Yeah, that's a sad kind of a forecast. But you mentioned South America, and there was this famous story that kind of connects to South America of about Ira Rennert, who ran several mining operations in the Midwest outside of St. Louis, Missouri, by a town called Herculaneum. And so the water and the groundwater and all kinds of there was all kinds of pollution going on for many, many decades. And so finally, and nobody could shut him down because he had his own kind of a former Marines, fully armed security detail at all of his offices and properties. Nobody could even get in to essentially deliver the summons to take him to court. So finally, they send the FBI, 150 agents, who stormed his facility. They took him out, and yeah, at Herculaneum, a lot of children were born with birth defects, 6 fingers and all kinds of deformities. So EPA was on his case for many years, but they couldn't do anything about his way of doing business in around St. Louis, Missouri. So after the FBI shot him down, and he got a permanent cease and desist order by, I believe, by the federal judge, he actually moved his mining operation to South America, where he bribed all the politicians, where the laws are not as strict as in the United States, and he was able to continue his pillaging operation in South America, polluting the rivers. He was doing times 10 what he was doing in Herculaneum, Missouri. And
Yeah.
and you mentioned South America, and there was one lawyer, um, the local tribesman in that region, who won a $6 billion lawsuit against Ira Rennert, but he couldn't execute on it. So in other words, it was just a piece of paper that he could never collect on, even though he won, and it was a victory for that tribe, but there was no way of collecting the money. And John, any comments on that? How even though we have a success story supposedly in South America, I think it was Peru, if I'm not mistaken, the country where they won $6 billion in restitution, but they could never collect from Ira Rennert. He found a way, and he's still doing business, polluting the rivers and murdering the newborn.
Yeah. Well, it's a common story, different details. But you may know of Stephen Donziger, who's a lawyer in New York and went up against Texaco in Ecuador for representing 30,000 people in a class action suit and won the case, $9.5 billion. Texaco has refused to pay it. And they've said the case was won in Ecuador, so it's invalid in the United States, even though all that their oil rigs were there. And then they maliciously went after Donziger, and they I don't know what they did to this judge, but in the end, the judge took away his license to practice law in the state of New York, and also had him under house arrest with a band around his ankle for over a year. But Texaco poured tremendous amounts of money into hiring lawyers and really corrupting the system. And unfortunately, Steve, we can talk about corruption in Latin America and elsewhere. We have terrible corruption here, but part of the problem here is it's a legalized corruption, which means by definition it's not corrupt, but it's a legal system that totally favors people with money, and corporations with money can bring in lots and lots of lawyers. And if they don't do anything else, they can tie up the courts forever and ever and ever and never have to deal with the issues. And then they can personally go after those who bring lawsuits against them or who oppose them. And Donziger is a great example of that. His life has been pretty much ruined for the last, 15 years or so, I think, over this. He's devoted his whole career ever since he graduated. Jay, stop it. It's my cat, sorry. So ever since he graduated from Harvard, he's devoted his 25 years ago or so, he's devoted his life to this cause. And I know the area in Ecuador they're talking about. It's very pristine, was a very pristine rainforest, and now it's just devastated, filled with wells of toxic waste, terrible toxic waste. It's not just oil, it's what's used to process the oil, it's what's used to pump the oil, and a huge rate of deaths and sickness, especially for children and so forth, from this toxic atmosphere that they live in, the toxic waters.
And John, using your experience, if you don't mind me asking some more or less specific questions. Let's say if you can kind of mentally go back and pretend like you're on the job, you're an economic consultant, economic hitman, and you go to the hottest spot today for our global audience, especially who is interested in Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Armenia. Let's say you arrive to Yerevan, the capital city of Armenia, and you meet with Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan of Armenia. What would you tell Mr. Pashinyan, and how would you, entice him to take out a loan, or to perhaps to maybe get the country involved with your agenda? What could you possibly offer to a country like Armenia, a small country in South Caucasus that doesn't have any natural resources, really? Azerbaijan has oil, Armenia does not. They only have copper, silver, and gold mines.
Yeah, I would tell them to join together with other countries that are in similar positions. And in fact, I just did this in Ecuador, and I did it to a couple of countries in Africa. And particularly, you can say in all these regions, particularly in Africa, I can say they're the wealthiest continent in the world, resource-wise, and the poorest one on a per capita income basis. So come together, stop bickering and come together. But you need to all come together. And so Azerbaijan and any of these countries that have these kinds of resources can find other countries that have similar resources. And rather than trying to compete with each other, well, which is what they do too often, is how do we get the big companies to come in and exploit our stuff? Get together and say, yeah, we don't have the technology. We can't exploit these resources ourselves. We need these companies to come in. but they need to pay our people a fair deal, and they, stop paying people under the table. Pay above the table. Let us develop our educational system. Let us build more hospitals. Give us a fair deal. But in order to do that, they really need to come together. One of the reasons that a country like the United States is so powerful is that we, despite all the factions and divisiveness in our politics, our country basically comes together when it's dealing with international trade. And the oil companies may compete with each other. They at the pump, they may try to, Texaco may try to get you, Chevron may try to get you to go to their pump and Shell to their pump. But when it comes to some national law that's going to impact all oil companies, they come together. And the same with the pharmaceuticals, the same with agribusiness, and the same with all the states when it comes to something like this. And that's one of the reasons that Putin wants the Soviet Union to be bigger and stronger. So this idea of union is extremely important. And again, if I'm a history of the American Revolution. I love to study that. We had 13 divisive and colonies, and where you are in New York, they held out to the end. When the vote was finally taken to ratify the Declaration of Independence, there was one abstinence. That was New York at the beginning. All the other colonies joined, but nobody opposed, which made all the difference. Finally, after years of debate, 12 colonies all agreed yes, and New York said, well, we abstain, and we're not going to get in the way of this, and so on. So I think my advice to these countries is you've got to unite. You've got to come together because it's the only way you can beat a bully. If you can't overpower the bully, you got to get your friends to help you.
And just a little kind of a um, side note. This is your advice today, not 40 years ago when you were on the other side of the curtain, so to speak, right? You would tell them to take out as many loans as possible, build as many hydroelectric plants before, but today you would just give a different advice, right?
Um, I would tell them to build more solar and wind and take a leadership role in alternative energy. And some people think of hydro as alternative, but at this point, in most of these countries, they're really good hydro has been pretty much used up. Now they got to go to places that are much more risky. But these countries do have to develop some of that infrastructure. There's no question, but don't do it in a way where you sell your soul and you collateralize the debt by opening the country up to horrible mining. And we've got to also look at the other player in all of this, which is China. And China today is outmaneuvering the US and Russia and everybody else in terms of being the number one investor and trader in more countries in the world than anyone else. They're way ahead of the United States today. And yet at the same time, they're doing something very similar. They're using their economic power to, to basically expand their own empire. I will say, and I'm not defending China in the least bit for what they're doing, but so far they haven't launched big military incursions anywhere except in their immediate vicinity, which they consider to be their own Tibet and that area, and they threatened Taiwan certainly, though they haven't done anything. Whereas we are looked at around the world as being a country that's very willing to go to Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq or Yemen or all over and impose our wills militarily, which is not a good position to be in. People do not want foreign troops on their soil for the most part.
And John, this is what you precisely discussed, the Chinese influence in your third edition of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And we're going to link your book in the description below. But, the reason I brought up Armenia several times because it's a small country that's sandwiched between Iran, Turkey, Russia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. So, in other words, that little corridor, the stretch of road that they're trying to build, and they cannot seem to agree because four parties to that agreement are not seeing eye to eye. And so here's my $1 million question, John. If everybody's wanting to know at the time of this recording, we don't have the answer yet, but supposedly Iran is going to attack Israel at any moment, any day, any hour, any week now, in retaliation for the previous attack that was made on in Tehran. So so here's the scenario. If you don't mind me sort of running this by you and getting your opinion of what's likely to happen. So Iran attacks Israel. Simultaneously, Azerbaijan will attack Armenia because they have these long-term, militaristic interests or taking over territory of Armenia. Then what is next? China will take Taiwan all at the same time, and Russia will switch to using tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine, Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Finland, right? So this would be the major escalation in the region and in the world. Would you agree that this might happen? It could happen. We don't know for sure, but this is a kind of a logical chain of events, because it seems like Russia and China might be on some kind of a synchronized schedule, right? If one goes, another one follow conveniently to take over Taiwan. Would you agree that that's a possibility?
Certainly a possibility, and I hope, as we all do, that it wouldn't happen, because I think you touched upon the biggest issue of all, which is the nuclear issue. Iran has apparently nuclear weapons. Israel and the United States and so many countries in that area. And it's something we tend to forget. I grew up in a time where we did the duck and cover. We were all terrified that the Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. They were going to attack us with them. We seem to have forgotten that. And yet I think the danger is much greater now than ever before. I know some of the stories of when we've come very, very close. There's one story in the United States, people in the United States, the defense industry, one particular individual got the information that missiles were coming in from Russia. Well, it was a faulty computer chip, as I recall. And in Russia, something similar happened in Russia. And again, it was a computer that interpreted clouds as being rockets. And these individuals were smart enough not to push the button or ask for the button to be pushed. But we're that close constantly to somebody making a mistake. And it's terrifying. And yet we don't think so much about that. It's kind of like we think, well, we've got it under control, but we don't necessarily have it under control. So if the scenario you painted, Sam, if that happens, I'm afraid that we might end up with a horrible, horrible calamity. And God only knows where that takes us. So it's extremely important that you be successful and that the peace movements be successful. I like to pose this question when I'm giving talks or in the book I'm working on right now, that what if there was a huge fleet of flying saucers above us, aliens threatening us? What would China and the United States and Russia do?
Join forces.
That's what history tells us. We would join forces to fight this common enemy. And I kind of think of, well, there is a common enemy today. It's our idea that we are apart from nature, not a part of nature. This is a very, very new idea. Well, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years old. But if you look at human history as being 200,000 years old, most of that time, like indigenous people now that I work with, believe that we are a part of nature. We are, we're interwoven with nature. We're not supreme over nature. Human supremacy, that's a bad concept. So if we can understand that the enemy is a philosophy that says maximize short-term profits, that says, businesses have the right to do whatever it takes to make short-term profits, that we are supreme over nature. And understand that the enemy isn't human beings, but it's this philosophy. We're the aliens. We have alienated ourselves from our planet by saying that we're aliens. We have said we're supreme over everything else. We are the aliens to everything else on this planet. It's like that story I told at the beginning of the cannibals. We are cannibalized. We are the flying saucers hovering above. I think to start really spreading that word, that it requires all of us coming together. I've taught at an MBA program in China. And just today, I had lunch with a gentleman who's very deeply involved in trying to build bridges between China and the United States. You know, we both see that the young people of China have lived through horrible pollution. My impression with working with MBA students in China is they want to turn this thing around. You know, it's not the story that we're told in the United States about the Chinese, and not necessarily the story that many of them are told about us. There is this political movement, let's call it whatever it is this xenophobic, nationalistic movement in so many countries that want to identify the enemy. They're the enemy. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. But the fact of the matter is that none of us is the good guys or the bad guys. We're all marching down this path towards self-destruction, a death economy, an economic system that's consuming and polluting itself into extinction. And it's to a large degree based on militarism and also based on the maxim that you have to maximize short-term profits and materialistic consumption regardless of the social and environmental costs. There is an alternative, which is the life economy, which pays people to clean up pollution, you know, to corral all the plastics that's floating around in the ocean, recycle it, to replant trees, and to regenerate destroyed environments, to create new technologies, solar and wind. We're moving in that direction. We are. The encouraging thing is that we are moving in that direction. But we need to move faster and harder, and to a large degree, that also is very dependent on the idea that there's nobody out there for us to kill. Stop war. The war is terribly, terribly destructive. Unfortunately, wars increase GDP. As you well know, the United States economy has a large part of it is based on the military-industrial complex, and that's true in Russia, and it's true in China, and it's true in so many, many countries. Well, get out of it. Put that money, our taxpayer money, let's put it toward, you know, creating new forms of energy that utilize air and water without digging up resources. Let's put it to creating a life economy.
You know, John, this is perfect timing to bring up this sort of a spiritual aspect of our lobbying. Besides being a kind of a pro-peace organization that promotes peace, we also would like to be a strong advocate for the environment, you know, for all those rare species that are disappearing or have disappeared, have gone extinct. You know, this concept, why do we even, it's a little bit abstract, but I'm going to connect logically here, all the dots here, but it's unimaginable to fathom that we have, as human beings on our own native planet, we have to pay for water. We pay for water to consume, to drink water. We have to pay money to drink water, this God-given gift, you know, just like air. But in countries like China and Japan, they have these vending machines. You put in an extra number of coins and you can breathe clean oxygen, or more or less cleaned up air. So
Right.
it's absurd. It's absurd. We have to pay for water, you know, in developed world like in the United States and Canada, and yet when the so-called the Canada geese, which is the proper way of calling that, we vernacular, you know, the vernacular is Canadian geese, but it's actually Canada geese. When it flies across the imaginary border between Canada and the United States of America, it doesn't have to show its passport to any, you know, border patrol agents. It just flies over. It doesn't care. It doesn't even know it's called Canada geese. It's just a wonderful God's created species, right? We put those labels. We put those crazy labels. We enslave other people to make them pay for water or for air, even at vending machines on the streets of China and Japan. It's insane to think that you need a little oxygen, you know, just to survive the race to the bus stop or whatever, the subway station Beijing or in Tokyo. But, it's insane. So I wanted to ask you, John, with your connection to the South American jungle and their philosophy and their kind of spirituality, um, can you share with our audience, what would be your sort of a ideal world where we're one with Mother Nature? How do we begin to educate the next generation to respect Mother Nature, to take care of it? What must we do? And I'm going to take notes from you because we're going to actually incorporate it into our lobbying effort as well as a separate lobbying.
Well, I think the most important is this perception that we are a part of nature. And, we are the four elements or the five elements in our body, earth, air, water, and fire, all fire in the heart. And then we've got the fifth element, which is our consciousness. And everything that we have is part of nature. And people sometimes don't get this, but, the materials of this house that I'm in and where you are, this all comes from the earth. To really, really understand and appreciate that. And when you really appreciate it, you don't want to build a mansion because that's stupid. You can live in a big city and still understand that you owe the building that you live in to nature, and you damn well better take care of it. And how do we move increasingly into this? I think the vision for the future is that we really develop this life economy. If you take a city like New York City, basically stop traffic, except perhaps some electric vehicles that bring in supplies and so forth, cover all the buildings with solar panels, and the streets, paint them white, or grow gardens in the streets. All the parking garages that now are no longer needed, those can become greenhouses, and you can aim sunlight in with mirrors. There's so many possibilities here, things we can do, exciting things that people get paid for. We're not talking about people going back and living in caves. We're just talking about a new perception of what it means to develop an social economic, governmental system that understands that we must recognize our total necessity to work with nature. And nature's speaking to us so loudly these days, so clearly. The glaciers are melting, the oceans are rising, there's more droughts and more fires and so on and so forth. We all know this, it's happening. And at the same time, I think the plants are speaking to us. There's more vegetarianism. There's more interest in herbal medicines. There's more interest among young people in the psychotropic plants, if you will, that often come out of the jungle. So we're getting a very, very strong message here. And I think, Sam, this is the most blessed time to be alive, because we truly have the opportunity to listen to the message that we're getting. And the opportunity is here to build a new economic system. It's what we call a life economy that pays us and pays us well to do things that enhance life on this planet, not just human life, but all life. It's something that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will look back on and thank us for. Right now, I have a 16-year-old grandson. I'm about to turn 80, and I have lunch with him. He lives near me, and it's like he looks at me like, why have you done this? Why have you done this, Grandpa? What the hell are you doing? And I'm glad now that you're turning around and speaking at universities and elsewhere in my high school and trying to turn things around. But that's what we need to move toward is this goal of changing the perception of what it means to be human beings, being human on this planet. It's an exciting time, Sam. It's a marvelous time, but there's so many opportunities to move in that direction. And I take great hope from a lot of young people all over the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, in China, all over Asia, Russia. There's an amazing consciousness change. And there's a pushback by the status quo, which you feel very strongly, being an advocate for peace, that pushback. But I've practiced martial arts most of my life, and one of the most important lessons is if you're up against a guy who's a lot bigger and stronger than you don't try to overpower him. You use his energy against him. And I think when you get the pushback from the lobbyists that work for the big corporations or whatever that are trying to stop you from doing what you know you need to do, to take energy from that, realize that the pushback is coming because they're afraid of you. They're desperate. They're afraid of you. They know that ultimately they're losing, and we may all lose. If they win on the short term, we all lose. But in the end, everyone will win when we move into this life economy.
And John, given our time, we just have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to ask you in closing one short question and let you kind of give us your blessing on how to best structure this, because that's your kind of a former line of work. You know how to structure things. So our goal is to do pro-lobbying, pro-peace lobbying, pro-environmental causes for the climate change. I have some statistic on my desk here about an iceberg in Antarctica that has melted. I have official statistic from 1983, and today it has shrunk by something like astronomical 45%. So people who say we don't have global warming, I can show the statistic. That statistic came from official sources, 1983, and recent measurements of that same area. So, but I wanted to bring up on a very, very positive and spiritual note. So we want to do pro-peace lobbying to counter the effects of the warmongers in DC, the so-called Beltway bandits, who work for the weapons manufacturers. We want to do environmental lobbying, and also we want to build or invest money into actively building so-called eco villages in the United States, around the world. And based on, there are so many success stories. Like, for instance, I'm a city guy. I've lived in a concrete jungle all my life, and I just now realizing that's a big mistake on my part, thinking city life is no. My goal is in the next 6 months to a year to move to a faraway eco village and be doing all my activity from that location. That's kind of like my epiphany moment, if you will. Like you had yours, I'm just now having mine. Kind of my this is my crossroads. I'm at a crossroads in my life to decide what I'm going to do, and so that's my path. And I wanted to ask you real quickly, John. There's this incredible eco village in the north of Scotland. It's called you may have heard of them, the Finhorn Foundation. And so what they've done in the mid 60s, it's a couple, a husband and wife. They drove around in their minivan. I think they call it in England caravan. But anyway, they were driving around. They saw this desolate spot. Nothing grows there. There's just sandy beaches with 100-mile-an-hour gusty winds. Nothing grows there. But they decided to take that desolate spot where nothing is possible, and they turn it right now into most beautiful tropical garden. They have basically, it's a community of approximately 350 like-minded people. They grow vegetables, they grow fruits, they have a power system off-grid, everything's off-grid, and they even have like a mini wastewater treatment plant. It's very, very sophisticated, but they're kind of faith-based, they're community-based, and I'm on their mailing list. I'm studying how they've done it, so we could also maybe duplicate something like that. In your opinion, John, do you think this is the way for us to do what the couple did at the Finhorn Foundation, where they actually connected with Mother Nature and they pray and they talk to their plants and vegetables, whatever before they harvest, they talk to it, and as a result, they have the largest watermelons, they have the largest cucumbers, whatever they grow, tomatoes in their gardens, in their large gardens. And it's incredible because I've learned about their operation just relatively recently. It's a miracle that they have this community. When you look at their website, it's green, lush forests, but prior to that, there was nothing. There was just the sandy beaches, desolate beaches. So, John, question to close our wonderful meeting today, our wonderful dialogue conversation. Do you think this is the way? If this, I'm motivated to highly do that, invest all my time, energy into these types of projects, what could you sort of maybe give your word of advice or your blessing to continue, or maybe you have another better idea for us to continue if that's our path?
Well, yes, and I think we all have to do what will bring us satisfaction individually, but do it in a way that answers the question, how can I do what I most want to do for the rest of my life in a way that helps transform the death economy to a life economy? So I do this as a writer. You can do it as a developer of a new kind of community. But to also recognize that around the world, there's so many people, and so many of them live in highly urbanized areas, and some of those urbanized areas are extremely impoverished, uh, that they can't all move to Finhorn or the place you're creating. I would challenge you, Sam, and you can do this whatever you want. Instead of going out into the country and creating this, pick a section of New York City, maybe 10 blocks, maybe one block, and develop it as the equivalent where there's no cars, it's all bicycles and maybe a few electric vehicles, and you grow gardens and you turn the parking garages into greenhouses and you make it beautiful. And you create spaces where people can come together and make music and be. I live on an island near Seattle, and we're in the process here of doing something we call the Earth Story 2040 project, and we're encouraging people to write short stories, including at the high school where we give prizes, and there's a lot of writers on this island. We're 35 minutes ferry ride from downtown Seattle, and so write a short story that says it's now 2040 and we are what we're calling an ecological civilization, which is basically a civilization. This island is an ecological civilization, which is based on a life economy. How did we get here? So rather than looking at what should we do, and I don't like that word, we should do this, we must do this, we have to do this. People, it's preachy. Let's look at what we did to arrive here in 2040 to get here. And one of the things is to have a local energy company. I mean, this is just one thing, that doesn't buy the electricity from the existing energy company, but that actually owns solar panels on most all the roofs. Maybe not all of them; they wouldn't be practical in all of them, but that solar panels and shuts the downtown street off to traffic and grows gardens on the downtown street and has solar panels around. And so all our energy here is generated through solar and wind by a local utility company that owns these. So I don't I don't really want to invest all the money I need to at my point in life on my roof to build solar energy. And my particular roof, it wouldn't be terribly efficient, but it would work. But if the energy company would put in the capital and take care of the maintenance and upgrade the system when new technologies come along, I'd be willing to pay a lot of money on that meter. I'd rather pay for that on my meter than what's coming in. So, but there's just all kinds of things that we can do. And at the beginning, I think before we were on the air, you said, if not us, and if not now, then who and when? And that's the attitude we're taking on this small island that has a community that's quite interested in these things. We're lucky that way. But if we can create a story here that says that it can be done on an island of 25,000 people, then can't that spread? And if you could create a story that says we can do this in a fairly devastated area of New York City, if we can do it there, it can be done in Soweto, South Africa. It can be done in Azerbaijan. It can be done anywhere. This is what we need. We need to create a new story of how we can bring nature into our cities, how we can bring nature into our hearts, how we can understand that we are a part of nature and that nature's everywhere. And we can all do this, and we can do it with great joy, and we can all live good lives doing it. It's not about sacrificing; it's about bringing everybody along in a better way. That's uh, that's a big challenge, Sam, but I'd love to see you do it.
We're gonna give it our very best, John, because if not us, who else will be willing to do it? And I'm at a crossroads, and my goal is to, John, what you said just a few minutes ago, is to unite on based on all of our sort of existing platform, unite like-minded people in those countries that are deemed kind of isolated, like Cuba, North Korea. I mean, if we can get them online, everything will be done digital on our platform, in Russia, in Belarus, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, in Turkey, in Iraq, in all of those, Sudan, Ivory Coast, globally, in every country, like-minded people who think just like us. We're having a wonderful conversation about building peace, and we need more people like us around the world to join our, at least virtually, digital platform, so that we can't lose control of our planet. And unless we unite digitally, it seems like we're on that path towards the abyss, and we're about to go over the ledge, and nobody's pulling the emergency brake. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to pull the emergency brake, unite all of us, the like-minded people, and at least meet periodically on a platform to have a conversation to discuss our vision. What do you say to that, John? I mean, is that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to take all of us. It's like I said with these countries of Africa, it's like you got to come together. We all have to come together across the planet to recognize we're in extreme crisis. We're on the road to self-destruction. And we need to come together to recognize that and say we've got a common enemy, and it's us.
I
It's
agree.
not us. It's not humans. It's our philosophy of short-term maximization of consumption, materialistic consumption, and profit maximization, and regardless of the social and environmental costs. That's got to stop.
I agree with you, John. So I want to, on this note, want to thank you for your time, for your wonderful energy. Thank you for doing what you're doing, for being who you are, and making this world a better place. And we're going to link your third edition book so our audience could have a chance to get your book. And then you're working on your next book, right? You still, do you have a title yet for your next book?
Yes, it's a novel, and the title is Message from Pleiades. And the stars, the seven sisters that are up there, and cultures around the world. Like I spent a lot of time with the Mayan culture. Some of their major cities, these huge pyramids, these incredible cities that they've built are designed after Pleiades. So many cultures around the world believe that the message is coming from Pleiades about how we have to turn things around. So this is kind of a play on that, and it's not a woo-woo type of book at all. It's an adventure story. It's exciting, but it gets into all the things we've been talking about, but from the standpoint of a novel, because I realize that all the 11 books that I've published so far are nonfiction. And a lot of people just don't read nonfiction. For pleasure, I don't read nonfiction. I read a lot of nonfiction because it's part of my job. But for pleasure, I read fiction. And so it's going to come out soon. I'm going to self-publish it. I've published with Random House and Penguin and Barrett Kohler and many publishers. I'm kind of tired of that route, and basically it's not going to cost very much, and people can get it. In fact, I'm going to send at least the first chapter out free, and then they can buy the next chapter for a little bit, or the rest of the book. So if people are interested in getting that first chapter, go to my website, johnperkins.org. Put your email address in the little box that's there, and you will get the first chapter free, probably within the next couple of months. And I think it's a fun book, Sam. I mean, I've enjoyed writing it so much. I almost can't bring myself to end it and send it out there because I'm enjoying it so much. It's so fun to write, and it's a great story, frankly.
How many pages is it going to be, John?
Yeah, I don't know. It's how do you measure pages when it's right now it's digital? It's a lot shorter than Confessions of an Economic Hero, probably about half the size. I want it to be fairly short, but it would probably be maybe 100 pages, 125 pages in regular book form.
Well, we can't wait. We're going to link to it on the article.
johnperkins.org.
Okay. Okay. We're gonna link that. Put a link below the video. So John, thank you for your time, for your wonderful energy, for your input, for bringing this positive energy to our world. And we all just hope and pray that we can survive and through these tumultuous times, and make it through and make this world a better place, right?
Yes, that's the challenge, and that's the blessed position we're in. That's the fun we're going to have with this. Thanks, Sam, for all you're doing. It's been a great pleasure. Really,
Thank you. Thank you.
keep
I
up your
appreciate it.
great work. All right, thanks.